The movie starts with Rachel arriving in Germany. It is 1945 and England has attacked and won over Germany. Rachel's husband, Lewis, is a high-ranking officer for England. He called her to Germany since the war was now over. They both met at the station and took a car to their location. They were clearing out a large house in Germany for them to live in. Previously, a prominent man named Stephen lived there. Stephen's community had been directly affected by the end of the war, and it was a difficult time for both of them. They wanted to make a fresh start. When Rachel and Lewis arrived at the house, they were welcomed by its previous owner, Stephen. That night, they shared their experiences and the hardships they had faced. Rachel seemed quite disturbed lately and had even started smoking. The next day, when Lewis went to his job, he encountered some revolutionary boys who still believed in Hitler. One of the boys tried to run away, forcing the officer to shoot him. Even as he was dying, the boy saluted Hitler. Lewis was deeply disturbed by this, as the boy was just a teenager. While exploring the house, they also see Stephen's daughter, named Frida. Frida was upset because this was her home, and she was being forced to leave. Later, when Lewis came back home, Rachel asked him when Stephen and his daughter would leave. With a heavy heart, he explained that the situation outside was very bad. If they sent Stephen and his daughter out, they wouldn't even have food or shelter. He suggested they could let them stay on the upper floor of the house. Rachel got angry at this idea. She wanted them to live alone and bring some changes to their life. She doesn't even want the staff to be around the house. However, Lewis didn't agree with her and convinced her to let them stay. For Rachel, the house and everything in it were very uncomfortable. The next day, Rachel was annoyed as there was an uncomfortable chair in her house. Just then, Stephen was passing by and noticed it. He then told Rachel how the chair was considered the most comfortable chair, and there was a philosophy behind making that chair. Rachel got agitated and asked him to leave. Stephen handed over the house keys to her and left. At night, while Rachel and Lewis were having tea, Rachel asked him how he could behave as if everything was normal. She was angered at how Lewis could follow his daily routine like nothing ever happened. It turns out that during the war, their son had died from a bomb blast, and this left Rachel deeply disturbed. Later, Rachel was crying in the tub while taking a bath, and Lewis noticed this but didn't interfere. The next morning, Rachel discussed with one of her friends about Stephen's stay with them. Her friend suggested that Stephen might hate them since they are Jews. Though he didn't show it, she feels every Jew seemed to hate them for being English. When Rachel came home, Stephen's daughter was playing the piano. Stephen sent her upstairs and apologized, explaining that the piano belonged to her mother. Stephen also mentioned that his wife had died during the war. This made Rachel very emotional. Stephen tries to understand his daughter, but she is very stubborn and refuses to listen to him. Rachel rethinks about her conversation with Stephen at night. The next day, Frida goes to her school where she meets a boy named Albert. Albert is a revolutionary and influences Frida. Meanwhile, Rachel and Lewis have friends over. One of their friends asks why they are still letting Stephen stay in their house, suggesting that Stephen might be plotting against them and still believes in Hitler. Lewis responds that they can't judge people like that. He has seen it in Stephen's eyes that he doesn't want to harm them. However, their friends remain skeptical, so Stephen is called in for an inquiry. Lewis is waiting for Stephen with some other officers for Stephen. During the inquiry, they ask Stephen if his family was involved in supplying guns to Hitler. Stephen explains that it was his father-in-law's business, and he had nothing to do with it. They also ask about his wife, and Stephen reveals that she died during the war. To avoid causing Stephen further distress, Lewis signals the officer to end the investigation. All of Stephen's identity papers and documents were with the authorities, but they hadn't approved them yet. Back at the house, Frida is looking at various items, including a gift she gave to Lewis, which contained a photo of them and their son. Frida notices this and steals it. Stephen, already disturbed by the interrogation, comes home to find Rachel angry at him. She asks about a particular painting of Hitler that had gone. Stephen, frustrated, lashes out, asking why they haven't just thrown him out if they hate him so much. He says if they need a reason, he'll give them one, and he angrily kisses Rachel before storming out. Rachel is left speechless. The next day, we see Frida spending time with her friend Albert. Frida enjoys his company very much. She gave the stolen gift of Rachel to Albert. He appreciates her. One evening, Rachel and Lewis were expecting guests, and Rachel had dressed up nicely. Lewis admired her and complimented her. They played some good music and wanted to have an intimate moment, but Lewis got to know about a protest happening in the city and had to leave. Rachel was disappointed in him. During the protest, Lewis was attacked by the protesters, but he was only trying to help them. Stephen, who was also outside, got caught in the chaos and was beaten by the police. When he returned home, he found Rachel and her friends having a party. One of Rachel's friends was playing the piano inappropriately, which might get it broken. The piano belonged to his wife, so this made Stephen angry. He tried to stop him, but he didn't listen. A fight was about to break out, but others intervened and restrained Stephen. He then leaves the room. He had a serious head injury, so Rachel bandaged him. Stephen accused Rachel of ignoring him, but she denied it. They grew closer and became intimate, but they stopped when they heard Lewis's car. Lewis didn't suspect anything. The next day, Lewis was in the bathroom looking for the gift Rachel had given him, which included a photo of their son, but he couldn't find it. He asked Frida if she had taken it and if she could return the photo, but Frida ignored him and left. Later, when Lewis and Rachel were together, Rachel confronted him, asking why he didn't take time off work after their son's death. She said she needed him, but he chose to go back to his job. Lewis explained that the country was at war and he had to go. Not wanting to talk further, he left. Lewis had to go away for work for 5 or 6 days. Rachel begs him not to go, but he has a job to do, so he leaves. Rachel felt very lonely, so she went to play the piano. She played the same tune that Stephen's brother used to play. Hearing this, Frida joined her. As Frida played a note, she made a mistake, and Rachel remarked that her son could never play that note correctly either. This brought back memories of her son, making Rachel emotional and causing her to cry again. Stephen came over to comfort her. The next day, Rachel invited Stephen and Frida for breakfast. They were watching a movie when Frida left, leaving Stephen and Rachel alone. They became intimate. The movie shifts back to Lewis. Some people are exploiting teenage boys to work against the government. Lewis was investigating this and found a photo of Albert, Frida's boyfriend. Meanwhile, Rachel and Stephen were enjoying their time together. Stephen told Rachel that she looked happy with him and had never smiled since she arrived. He mentioned that he was planning to move to the mountains and build a nice house where Rachel could join him. Rachel reminded him that his papers were still not approved, but Stephen reassured her it would be sorted out. Rachel sought help from her friend to expedite Stephen's papers. When Lewis returned home, he was very happy and said he had good news. He called Stephen downstairs and announced that they were going back to England. Rachel, who initially wanted this, was now confused because of Stephen. That night, they were going to a party. Stephen secretly met Rachel and urged her to reveal their affair to Lewis. Rachel was scared, but Stephen insisted it was better to tell him. At the party, Rachel's friend told Lewis that if Lewis believed Stephen was clean, then he could have directly asked him to release his papers instead of asking Rachel to do it. This made Lewis suspicious of Rachel. He confronted her about his doubts. Rachel apologized and explained that everything changed after their son's death and that Lewis had left her alone. She felt that Lewis blamed her for their son's death, to which Lewis didn't disagree. This made Rachel very emotional, and she ran out of the party. As Rachel was leaving, Lewis joined her. Suddenly, Albert attacked them, and an officer in their car was killed. Lewis chased Albert. Albert, while running, reached a river and couldn't go any further. Frida, who was following him, also arrived at the river. With nowhere to go, he urged Lewis to shoot him, but Lewis let him go. Suddenly, Albert slipped and drowned in the river. Frida tried saving him, but Lewis grabbed her as the ice sheet was thin, and she could also die. Lewis called other officers who took the killed officer's body. Lewis and Rachel head back home with Frida. After coming home, Lewis told Rachel that he understood her desire for a new start and a new life. He said he couldn't blame her and that perhaps it was his fault. Meanwhile, Frida visited Stephen, who was preparing to leave. He told her that he would always protect her and that she was very important to him. Frida said she missed her mother a lot. Stephen admitted he missed her too, but emphasized that they had each other for support. Stephen then meets Rachel, who tells him that Lewis knows everything about their affair. Stephen asks her to be ready to leave in the morning. The next morning, Stephen was getting ready to leave. Stephen was about to say something, but Lewis interrupted, urging them to just leave. As they were about to go, Rachel came to Lewis. Lewis asked how their son had died. Rachel told him that it was in a blast and he died there instantly. Lewis told Rachel that he never wanted to leave her, but he had to because everything about her reminded him of their son. Her laughter, her violin playing, it all brought back memories. Hearing this, Lewis hugged her and Rachel hugged him back. Then, Rachel left with Stephen. Upstairs, Lewis looked at his son's belongings and cried deeply. As Stephen and Rachel were about to board the train, Rachel changed her mind. Stephen pleaded with her not to leave him, saying he needed her and that she wanted a new start. Rachel replied that she still wanted a new life, but with Lewis, and couldn't leave him like this. Lewis was ready to leave for England, but saw Rachel was back. They embraced, forgiving each other for everything that had happened. Both had been in pain after their son's death, which had affected their behavior. After talking openly, they realized how much they needed each other. They kissed and hugged each other. The movie ends here.